Hey everybody, welcome to the Legacy Podcast. My name's Bill Dupenthaler.
And I'm Mike Conan, and this is a podcast for disciples who want to make disciples. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Legacy Discipleship Podcast. I'm Mike Conan with my good friend and colleague, Bill Dupenthaler, and we wish, first of all, if you're seeing this at the time that it comes out, wish you a happy Thanksgiving. It is that time, but we're not going to do a Thanksgiving podcast. We talked about it, and we did that last year. We decided to just stick with what we've been doing.
I mean, everybody's doing Thanksgiving stuff. That's just so last year.
Exactly. By the way, we think you should be thankful
all the time.
all the time.
All the time.
So
That's right.
that's definitely part of it. But we're going to continue in our series on our secret sauce of legacy. And we did an introduction last time, and we told you the secret ingredient that we think makes disciple makers is being people who build relationships with other people. And we talked about the biblical case for building relationships last week. We looked at how from the very beginning it says, hey, it's not good for us to be alone. God had designed us for a relationship just like he is in relationship with Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Jesus modeled relationship building. When he was a disciple maker, he stood out from the others in the sense, I've called you friends, not servants. And so, and then he calls us to do the same. And we shared last week how both of us have been really impacted by people who'd taken the time to build relationships with us. And in fact, I think both of us would say that was the biggest impact next to Holy Spirit in our lives, is these men who had purposely and personally chosen to impact us and invest in us. And so today we're going to shift gears just slightly and say, okay, we've made the case last week that the Bible and the Lord call us to build relationships. We talked about how you and I were pretty impacted deeply by the relationships so we kind of made the case on that front, our personal experience and also biblical evidence. But today we want to talk about, is the world, would the world really be changed by relationships? Like, is this really something the world needs right now? And I'm going to turn it over to you, Bill, to kind of share a little bit, because as we were talking about this, it just struck us the answer to that is yes.
Yeah. Well, that was about 3 years ago when we started Legacy. Before we started, but we had this idea. I started meeting with people, and if you've listened to all of our podcasts, one of our first podcasts, we kind of told this story, but it's worth telling again. I started meeting with people and would ask the question, tell me your story, and these are all people that I had known over the years, and most of whom at one point would have said, yes, I'm a follower of Jesus, and they were in a small group and going to church and all that kind of stuff. And so I would ask them to tell me their story, and as their story unfolded, most would have some sort of a description of how they had drifted in their faith. Of course, there were some that, were just doing great, and there were some that didn't just drift, they were completely gone and just done. Yeah. But for the most part, there was some description of kind of a drift in their faith. And so the first goal, of course, was to say, okay, well, we need to try to get people reconnected to their faith. But then the second thing that we really noticed, and this is to the point of today's podcast, is well, tell me about your relationships with other followers of Christ. Are you connected? Do you have a small group? Are you going to church? And again, the majority, like probably most, would say, I mean, yeah, some would say, yes, I go to church, but pretty much we go, a couple times a month, and then we, come home, and that's kind of it. Well, what about, a small group that's holding you accountable and in relationships and all that kind of stuff? And most would shrug their shoulders and go, not really. I have my buddies at work, and, go to the gym, and, but that's it. No, and something that Mike, that you question you asked early on of people, is this idea of tell me about your 3 a.m. friends. Like, who would you call at 3 a.m.? And most people would say, I have no idea who I'd call at 3 a.m.
Right.
So is there a need for this idea of significant relationships. And we're going to make the case today in this episode that we think that there is a huge need.
And just to reiterate, if you're not familiar with Our True Legacy, one of the things that we have is a vision, and our vision is pretty simple, or mission, vision, whatever we want to call it on a given week, I guess, which is connecting people to God, connecting people to each other and fellow believers, and then connecting people to Great Commission.
Right, right.
And part of the reason for that is we see so much disconnection, like you said, Bill.
Yeah.
So much disconnection in the world. So we're going to dive into that for this little bit here. There's so much disconnection in the world. It's really hard to figure out where to start, right? Like, how do you begin to talk about all this disconnection that we see around us? And I would argue that we've never really been overly connected. Most people don't have 3 a.m. friends. Most people do life on their own. In fact, they just have found a way now, especially to entertain themselves to death, so that they don't have to build relationships with people. You can live on your own now, read books, you can watch movies, you can watch YouTube, you can watch TikTok, whatever, and you could survive and thrive without having a single relationship in your life in some way. Right?
Yeah. My context, when we started Legacy, many of you know that I worked with Young Life forever, and so I was working with high school kids, and then later on with college students as well. And it was, I think, a little bit easier for us as Young Life staff people and Young Life volunteers to get students into these relationships and in these small groups, because they have different kinds of schedules, and they have a lot of freedom, and they're open, and
they're young adults,
and they're young, and they don't have a lot of responsibilities, and so that was the context, and it was like, okay, well, you can get like this little group of teenagers together in a small group, or even these college students, they get involved in a campus ministry or something like that. But as adults,
they don't have a wife. They don't have kids. They don't have a job.
Right. They just have a couple of classes. And they get involved in their little fellowship groups, and it's great. It's super cool. But you get into real life, and you have all those things, and a mortgage, and a family, and a job, and responsibilities, and it gets difficult. And we do see. So I guess we've sort of morphed into one of the things that's on our list. We're out of order here, Mike, but I guess we'll roll with it. But it's this whole idea of busyness,
right?
And people just, and maybe, I don't know, we're not going to try and rank them, but this would certainly be among the top ones that I hear all the time. Is, man, I'm just so dang busy. Like you propose to somebody, hey, would you be interested in let's get some guys together and get in a little group, and I can't tell you how many guys I've heard say, well, that sounds nice, but I just don't know how I'd fit that in.
It's fascinating. I saw one of the news shows, I remember 2020, 48 Hours, one of those shows. They did this, and it was 15 years ago. So before phones had exploded like they have today. It was, so it was different things. But they asked people how busy they were. And people said, I'm just so busy. I'm busier than anyone has ever been in history. Is the way that they felt like this generation is the busiest. So they started asking them how many hours they worked. And it was very, very fascinating, because as they took this poll and looked at people, what they discovered was they were actually working less hours than they had 10 years before. Okay, so people are not working more. And I think that would even be more the case now, post-COVID. I think people are working even less and less hours. And so, but what made them feel busy was television. And because they had all these things that they were doing, quote unquote, that were important in their mind or whatever, that they were part of their ritual. So they had all these TV shows that they watched that made them feel like they had something that they were doing that was keeping them busy.
Interesting.
And so now if we fast forward, 15, 20 years later, whatever it is, now we've got all these other things, right, that make us feel busy.
Yeah, it's not so much television. That was back in the day.
Maybe our generation, yeah.
Yeah, before social media and phones and that kind of thing. Now it's really those things. One of the interesting things to me about cell phones and all that kind of stuff. I remember when that first was a thing. The idea was, oh, we're going to be more efficient.
Yep.
So it will create more time because now you can accomplish, more in less time. But all it did was just make it easier to work. And so now, I mean, for a lot of people, myself included, I've always got that phone with me. And so on a Sunday afternoon, somebody texts me something and off I go. I'm responding to a text and I'm working.
Well, especially since your job is
Relationships, right?
Yeah.
Right. That's what That's why I tell people I'm a professional coffee drinker.
Yeah, it's funny because you don't drink coffee much.
Well, I drink, the little Nespressos at home, but yeah. So it's it is a really interesting thing. This whole idea of whether they're actually busy or perceived busyness.
It feels like they're busy.
Yeah. Yeah.
It feels like you're busy.
Yeah.
That is what you're facing. Is it feels like you're busy.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
what I think what ends up happening is people just fill up their time.
Yeah.
And so then they develop habits with the things that they fill up their time with. And not that we wouldn't want you to just spend time with your wife, not that we wouldn't want you to spend time with your kids. I mean, I'm a great example of a guy who's got 4 kids and a couple of them are little athletes. So I end up going to all this stuff and then you start enjoying it. And so then it becomes a part of your life.
Right. Right.
Rather than just letting them do their stuff, you end up going because you have to drive them anyway when they're younger. And then you end up enjoying it. So you just stick with watching it all the way through,
Yeah. Yeah.
I had a friend of mine once say that, I don't know if this is right or wrong, that no parent should ever be at every one of their kids' events. And what his point was, and I think this is really thought-provoking, I don't know if it's right or wrong, is what we end up doing as parents, and I'm speaking to myself now, is we make it all about our kids. And so they become the center of the universe. Do you know in history, when people are the center of the universe, it doesn't end well?
Right.
Like, look at child actors, look at athletes, look at actors, pick your famous person who became the centerpiece of anything, pastors who become mega pastors. We are not meant to be worshiped. We are not meant to have things revolve around us. And that was his point, is if you create a system where everything revolves around something else, it can be a challenge.
Well, your family is a great thing, but it's not a great God.
That's a great way to phrase it.
Your kids are a wonderful, important part of your life, but they're not your Lord.
Yes. Yeah. And we're talking about a healthy family too. I mean, there are other people who are workaholics. There are other people who don't put in their, but you can be too busy in so many ways with so many different things, right?
Yeah.
Or feel like you are.
Yeah. And I mean, and this is it's a balancing act. It really is. Because you want to be at all your kids' things, but at the same time, man, I talk to people and this is a little bit off topic, I guess, but they've never been out alone with their wife, since they had kids, because we just don't want it. We don't trust, having a babysitter or whatever, and we just want always have our kids with us, and it's like, man. In my view, it's like, no, you need to find a way to get some time alone with your wife.
It's a good idea.
It's
a good idea.
So, but anyway, this whole idea of putting anything ahead of the Lord is definitely not a good idea.
Yeah, well, let's circle back to relationships. Our relationships in the world. I think another thing that we had listed right away that both of us is just fresh is COVID. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, how COVID impacted people's relationships outside of their family. People had a natural circle of influence, with their work, with their church, with clubs. Well, not clubs is the right word, but other parents and things like that. You had all kinds of different natural places where you had your circle of influence, your people,
Well, relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of the friends of mine used to say that sports teams become your church. And I don't think that's 100% accurate, but in some ways, for many people, it is.
Yeah.
Because that's who you spend all of your time with. That's who you're. But COVID then immediately put the brakes on things, and not just for a short time for a lot of people, but people are still coming out of it, I think.
Yeah. Well, a few weeks ago in one of our episodes when we were going through the Let Us passages in Hebrews 10, let us not give up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing. And I think that whole idea of habits, people got out of the habit of going to church. They got out of the habit of, I'm involved with Rotary. They got out of the habit of going to Rotary. They got out of the habit of going to the gym. They got out of the habit of going out to dinner. They got out of the habit of going out, period. They got out of the habit of going into the office because now they're working remotely.
Yeah.
And so many people haven't got back to working in person. They haven't got back to going to church. They haven't got back to Rotary. They haven't got back to any of these things. And now they find themselves, in one of our other things in our notes, in isolation.
Right. It's funny how isolation has two components. One component of isolation can be you actually are alone. And this would be like my mom, a widow. You are alone and you spend 22 out of 24 hours of your day alone. Like that is a reality for some people who probably are listening to the podcast here. But then there's the other part of isolation too, where you're around people, but nobody knows you. Right?
Yeah.
And I think that the people that we're thinking of are both those folks. That is, that they're, especially coming out of COVID, we see more people isolated where they actually are not in relationships with people outside of their family anymore.
Yeah.
But we also see this, I think, increase in not knowing each other.
Yeah.
Because we had face masks on for so long, we kept our distance for so long, we purposefully didn't get together with people, and maybe it's social anxiety or whatever it is that's in all of us now. Just I don't know, but it seems like there's a struggle with that isolation.
Well, yeah, and I was just thinking too, as you're talking about this idea of being alone in a crowd.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that people have found as a challenge. We were talking about this on Saturday when we had breakfast with my brother.
Yeah.
This idea of going to a new church. And so many people that got out of the habit of going to church, and then now they say, okay, well, maybe let's try and get back, and so they're going to a couple of different churches, and my brother Paul was saying that the first church they visited, his wife broke into tears because it's like, I don't know anybody here.
Yeah.
And so you can go to a place, and especially imagine a single person trying to, I need to get back to church, and show up at church, and somebody shakes your hand at the door, and then you sit down, and you sit through the whole thing, and then maybe somebody shakes your hand on the way out, but you're all alone, and you don't feel a connection. That can be challenging.
Well, and as a pastor, I'll tell you, if somebody's coming to your church, one of the things I learned is they want to connect. I didn't know that at first. When I'm first learning, you just think, oh, they're here. It's great to have them. But the longer you do it, and the more people you talk to, the more you realize if somebody's showing up at your church, there's a reason. And they're wanting to connect with God. They're wanting to connect with other people. Sometimes one, sometimes the other. Sometimes they're wanting to connect with the Great Commission too. I mean, don't get me wrong, but there's definitely a sense of when people are drawn into and make that step of coming in, they want to be connected. Now, it doesn't mean they want to be having 30 people jump on them when they,
right. Or like let's. Are there any visitors here today?
Yeah, raise your hand.
Stand up.
Yeah. We want to give you a gift. You stand there while everybody watches us bring you this
and you
gift.
feel incredibly awkward, and I am never setting foot in this place again.
Right. Or you get cornered by the one person who doesn't have any social skills and they talk to you for an hour. That's not what people want.
Right.
Obviously.
Right.
Yeah. But there is a sense, I think, where people who are in isolation, as we made the case yesterday, it is not what God would have for them. It's not what he wants, and it's not what's best for us. I mean, anybody who picks up any magazine, clicks on a Facebook link or Twitter link or whatever link, or reads a book, you're going to see somebody talking about the problems mentally that came out of COVID and the isolation it created. And if we were to take the test case, it would be our kids, and the social impact that it's had on our kids and the next generation. We're not going to dig into that, but we can just say this: it's not good. It's not healthy. And we know that. And everybody knows that. And the culture we live in today is less healthy relationally than it was 2.5 years ago.
Well, yeah, and I think speaking about unhealthy relationships, I think some of the things too that create this isolation and this lack of relationship is maybe the settings where people are sort of not forced, but in essence forced to be in somewhat of a relationship. Maybe it's at work.
Yeah.
And so the relationships they have at work, it's either somebody that they're competing against for the next, promotion or whatever, or it's people that are your supervisors or people on your team that the only time they hear anything is when they screw up, or it's not done right, or it could have been done better, and there's kind of a negative connotation essentially to relationships.
Yeah. I mean, I love what you're saying. I think another way to look at that is how many of us have somebody in our life that we think, man, I just love being around that person, because when I'm around them, they're going to bring the best out of me. They believe in me. They're cheering me on. They're up in my balcony, as we talked about, that there's balcony people who are cheering you on from the balcony and calling you up to a greater place. And there's people in the basement trying to pull you down. How many people have balcony people in their lives? And I will tell you this, there are some cheesy balcony people that people, I don't know about that, but I'll tell you, even those cheesy people like them. They like having them around.
Well, yeah, because they're always so positive.
And they do, even if they're cheesy and they're like, oh man, what a cornball. They're so insecure. They do this all. And, like you look at these athletes and their entourages, half of them are these, yes men, whatever you call them, like encouraging, you're the best, you're the bomb, people love that. And you and I love that too. And not in a prideful way, but in a, you could do this. God's working, way.
Encouraging. Yeah.
And I think it's so good and powerful.
Yeah. We used to, back in the day in Young Life, we would do this little metaphor where somebody would stand on a chair and then the other person is on the ground it would walk up and they kind of shake hands, and the person in the chair would try, we'd say, okay, first of all, person in the chair, pull that person on the floor up onto the chair with you. And then of course they pull and pull and pull, and the person on the ground would just, nah, you're not going to pull me up on the chair. And then we
tried this earlier, by the way, and you tried to pull me up, and you made me feel
it didn't
fat
work
because you couldn't pull me up.
I couldn't pull you up.
I was really hurt. I'm still crying inside.
Yeah, and then the reverse. Okay, now the person that's on the ground, pull that person off the chair. And thankfully, when we practiced this, Mike, you didn't pull me off the chair because he would have killed me. But it's very easy to pull somebody off the chair when you're on the ground. Yeah. And so basically, the idea is in relationships, man, it's way easier to get pulled down than it is to get pulled up.
Yeah. And when I was a pastor and I would preach on encouragement all the time, which we did a whole podcast on, so we don't need to go into too much detail here, but one of the things I always told people is it's so much easier to be a basement person than a balcony person.
Yeah.
Especially like if I go anywhere, I can tell you 50 things that are wrong with somebody. Like if I wanted to, I could look in the mirror and pick myself apart like crazy. I could pick anybody apart like crazy. It's so easy to do. What's hard to do, though, is to look at yourself and see where God's working, put yourself into others and be that person who's speaking goodness, truth.
Yeah.
There's a whole thing in Philippians about that. Whatever's right, whatever's good, whatever's praiseworthy. Think about these things.
Yeah.
I love those kind of people.
Yeah, I was just thinking about a time a number of years ago. I was the camp speaker at one of Young Life's camps, Malibu, up in British Columbia.
Nice.
And at the end of every week, so we're up there for a month. So we did like 3 or 4 camps in a row. And so at the end of every week, we'd sit down with the trip coordinators. Every group of comes with. So there's a handful of trip coordinators.
Yep.
We'd sit down and with them before they leave. So that so the whole kind of the team of people putting on the camp sit with the trip leaders and evaluate the camp.
Oh boy.
And you know, and you get feedback and all that kind of stuff. And they've actually changed the way they do these things now. They do them in written form instead of like verbally right in front of everybody. And then the written evaluations, the camp manager just sort of filters that and speaks to the individual people. But anyways, so they're going around the circle.
Wiser way to do it, yeah.
So you know, I was a camp speaker, so now it's like, well, let's give feedback to Bill on how the talks went this week. So you know, just for his own benefit. So for next week, you know, anything, and it was positive. You know, everybody was, you know, man, it was awesome. You know, blah blah blah. And one guy, and I mean, this is probably like 15, 20 years ago, and I still remember it.
Oh yeah.
This, you know, one guy goes, yeah, you know, to be honest, I'd give it maybe a C-.
Nice.
Thanks. That's really helpful.
So you say I passed.
Yeah, barely. Yeah, below average. You know, and that's all he had to say. Yeah. And it's amazing how that one little comment, amidst all the positive feedback, that one comment here, a C-. I'm like, oh dang it. And I was so deflated, and it took a lot of people kind of like, don't worry about what he said. You know, you did a great job, and blah blah blah. You know, so anyway, this whole idea, it's so easy to get pulled down.
Well, and if we just coming back to what we're talking about, relationships, people don't have balcony people in their lives. Most people, and
no.
Even their spouse can, you know, it can be challenging because you're constantly trying to, you know, you're working towards becoming better people, and so sometimes you aren't that encouraging presence you want to be to your spouse either.
Yeah.
A couple other things I guess we could touch on. We touched on the screen isolation a little bit, but I wanted to just kind of hammer that a little bit more. I don't know what the average use is now, but I know in COVID they saw screen usage go up 2.5 hours a day for the average adult. Teens' actual screen usage went up 6 hours a day during COVID.
Unreal.
Pretty crazy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but adults 2.5 hours more a day. So they were at, I think the level before was 3 hours, then it went up to 5.5 hours.
Yeah.
During COVID. And I imagine it's probably come down a little bit as people have kind of gotten back to, but I wonder if it has.
Yeah, I don't know. But the bottom line is, with all these things, and you know, we could go on and on, but I think we're just about out of time. But the bottom line is, people are isolated. People are lonely. People are lacking those 3 a.m. friends. People are not generally in taking the time or have the time to be in committed relationships or to be in small groups. Many people have not made it back into church and into relationships and that kind of thing. So, trying to make the case in this episode that there's a huge need for these relationships that God designed us to be in.
Yeah, and if I were to dare say the point that I would want to hammer with the last point would be this: hurt is also really a big deal.
Yeah,
and people have been hurt, and most people are not in relationships for a reason. And the reason they're not in relationships is they felt rejection and pain. And there is a part of us, in fact, this is how our bodies are naturally wired, is our body naturally shoots pain into our different parts of our body, our hands, whatever it is, so that we will stop using that. Because if we keep using it, it's going to cause damage.
Yeah.
And that's what emotional pain is. Emotional pain is our body telling us stop doing that because it's causing more damage to our soul. And so, and I do think that is part of what we're facing too with all the, we could go make a list, but just remember this: as you're dealing with people, their part of them is actually inside pushing you away. And so as we think about the culture that we're a part of now, there's so much hurt, there's so much pain, there's so much brokenness, there's so much, you know, whether it's broken families, which is a huge part of what has happened in our culture today, or it's broken relationships in schools, which is a whole other problem for teens. Work, you can go into all these things we've just talked about, and saying that the other thing that kind of throws gas on the fire for all of these things is people have pain.
Right.
And so I guess that I would just say it's triple fold. The challenge that is before us is people need relationships, but at the same time, they're pushing back against relationships.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? Well, we need to wrap up. But
Yeah.
good discussion. We're going to continue this topic the next few weeks. Relationships, the secret sauce of legacy, and certainly what God created us for. And we're just so grateful for all of you that support us, encourage us. Follow along this podcast. Please do go check out our website, ourtruelegacy.com, and lots of resources there and ways to get involved and certainly to support financially. And we do wish you a great Thanksgiving if you're listening to this in the next few days. And otherwise, whenever you're listening to this, we just want to, now I'm trying to think of what to wish them, because wish you a happy no, but we're just we're so
wish you
grateful.
great relationships.
Yeah, we wish you great relationships. Anyway, let's sign off. Let's continue to be disciples who make disciples.
Amen.
Amen.